In the early days of the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic, an alliance was created. The Jedi appreciated the Republic's commitment to peace and democracy, and the Republic viewed the Jedi as a moral authority, a group of warriors that could be trusted to protect the Republic from its many enemies. The Republic would grant the Jedi a plot of land on Coruscant that one day would become the Jedi Temple, in an attempt to encourage the Jedi to establish a permanent presence on the Republic's capital. It was an alliance in the short term that was good intention, but in the long run had severe compatibility issues. The Galactic Republic was a government system that emphasized separation of powers, an independent judiciary, and of course checks and balances on the individual branches of the government. It was in charge of managing a massive amount of territory and people, and had to find compromises at every level in order to not alienate its diverse member states. It was given a mandate to rule, and therefore shouldered a great responsibility to ensure peace and stability so that sentient beings could do what they did best, which is grow, learn, create, and explore. But for all of this to work, for the Republic to be widely accepted by its many member states, there needed to be a set of universal values that every member state could agree on. And for the Republic, that was the Galactic Constitution and a rules-based order. Where the Jedi fit in all of this bureaucracy and procedure is hard to understand or explain. And that's because there is no real written agreement between these two organizations as far as we know. Unlike most organizations and departments within the Republic government, the Jedi was not created out of necessity by government agencies or bureaucrats. Instead, it already existed as an entity, and it was simply rolled into the larger government without any requirements for it to change. As a result, the links between the Jedi and the government were as esoteric and vague as the Jedi's understanding of the Force. I personally don't like bureaucracy. I prefer to do most things with a handshake. But even I understand that an oath of loyalty is too vague to cement a relationship between a central government and an organization which will go on to have a huge impact on what happens in the wider galaxy. Before we continue though, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com. These guys are the premier lightsaber manufacturers in the galaxy, and right now all of their lightsabers are 30% off with free shipping until the end of July. Ownersaber.com is always rolling out unique and interesting lightsaber designs like this, the Midnight Sun. This black aluminum alloy hilt has a very luxurious look, fit for a noble Force user with a rich lineage. Trimmed with gold and lined with small vents that lets the blade's glow come through it, the Midnight Sun is a terrific addition to any collection, or for the discerning lightsaber user who likes to keep it pretty low-key but also enjoys a little bit of flash. Check out this lightsaber and many more at ownersaber.com. I'll be linking more information about it in the description below. You can also use my promo code EWOK, that's all caps, for an additional $15 off. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. At the core, the Jedi was an organization dedicated to studying and understanding the Force. Not in a scientific way, mind you, like how certain Sith Lords like Plagueis went about it, or how the ancient Jedi would approach it. The Jedi of the Ruusan Reformation were relatively timid. They exalted the Force, and they tried not to delve too deeply into how the Force operated. There was a great fear of the immense power that knowledge could give individuals, and of course, they had this all-consuming fear that such power could lead to the dark side. There was also a view that studying the Force through scientific methods was relatively perverse because the Force was not some type of inanimate object. The basic understanding was that the Force was an energy field and at the same time a consciousness that seemed to dictate the course of the galaxy itself through relatively unexplained and oftentimes random actions. And in the way, the Jedi were right. The Sith were too arrogant. Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis' attempt to create life from the Force received severe lashback from the Force itself. Darth Plagueis would be completely cut off from the Force as a result. Some would argue that the creation of the Chosen One was actually a response to the Sith's brutal attempt to shift the cosmic force into the dark side's favor. So clearly the Force has a will of its own. And the Jedi cultivated themselves in order to commune with the Force. They had to let go of worldly pursuits and their attachments to find true enlightenment, just like many Eastern spiritual practices of self-awareness and improvement. In the 20th century, you had the emergence of relatively extreme political ideologies, like communism, for instance, which required a great deal of faith from its followers. This is why communism saw religion and any other competing ideology as competition and oftentimes tried to eradicate them or destroy them. During the Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward in China, not only was religion attacked and destroyed, but also Chinese culture, philosophy, the teaching profession, academia, basically anything that could refute the dogma of the Communist Party. Fascist groups also had their own ways of destroying opposing ideologies or appropriating them for their own needs. But a republic is a system that requires courage and compromise from the leadership. A republic usually tolerates different ideas. It sees the wisdom of having an opposition because it can improve the health of the government, provide new ideas and courses of action in case things get stagnant. Republics also support a plethora of different religions and see the value that they bring to its people and even the social services they can provide. The Galactic Republic has always been a place of collaboration and compromise, which made it superior to other forms of governance. But the Republic, democracy, these were still ideologies, and so other ideologies like authoritarianism, various religious beliefs had to be separate from the state functions. When you give the Jedi an official position within the government itself, that's when potentially problems arise. The Jedi Code informs the Jedi's every action and decision, but these are not beliefs that are held by the general populace, which is problematic because taxpayer money was going to the Jedi Order to help fund their operations and activities. The Jedi used judicial ships, could co-opt Republic military forces, and even served as diplomats on behalf of the central government. Chancellor Palpatine understood this issue, and he would manipulate the Jedi into showcasing the galaxy just how big of a problem this actually was. When Anakin Skywalker found out that Sheev Palpatine was in fact Darth Sidious, he quickly notified Mace Windu. Instead of going through the proper channels and verifying what Anakin said was true, instead of reporting this information to the Senate and trying to get a vote of no confidence on the Chancellor, which could lead to his removal, Mace Windu rounds up a posse and they go straight to the Chancellor's office and try to apprehend him. And that, of course, ends up in a duel to the death. Now, I understand that Mace Windu was trying to do the right thing, but he placed his own order's needs and desires before that of the galaxy's. What the Jedi saw as a heroic attempt to destroy the Sith looked awfully a lot like a Jedi-sponsored coup and attempt to seize control of the Galactic Republic. And this is a perfect example of why a lack of structure and an official agreement between the Jedi and the Galactic Republic was always going to be problematic. The Jedi were far too powerful, too used to doing whatever they wanted to do. Mace Windu, as one of the Masters of the Order and a High Council member, was allowed to round up a posse and journey to the Chancellor's office without any oversight. He didn't even confer with his fellow Jedi Masters, or the ruling council. The decision to declare Palpatine a Sith was made by him and Anakin alone. As we mentioned before, there were many legal ways to actually remove the Chancellor from office, which ironically is how Palpatine legally got rid of Finis Valorum in the first place. Now, a lot of people might point out that Mace Windu was correct and that Palpatine was an evil Sith Lord, and had he killed Palpatine in that office, had Anakin not stopped him, then the galaxy would have never suffered through years of authoritarianism. But there is chaos in Mace Windu's actions, and it sets a dangerous precedent. What if in the future another Jedi decides to overthrow a Chancellor simply because he doesn't like the Jedi? Or better yet, what if there is a Sith leader or a dark side leader who truly wants to create a stronger and better Republic government and has the support of the people, but simply wants to remove the Jedi from power? In that scenario, the Jedi's self-preservation and need to balance the Force by destroying the dark side is extremely undemocratic and runs counter to the principles of the Republic. Defenders of the Jedi would say that the Jedi were a moral organization and that they were held in high regard by most people in the galaxy. They were a universally trusted institution for a time period, and that's relatively rare, especially in today's media environment. But I would argue that shouldn't really matter in a rule-based order. Things must be rational, and sentient beings are always prone to corruption and slaves to their emotions. Any organization that doesn't have checks and balances is doomed to fall for its own ego and make mistakes. And if the Jedi truly believed in the Republic, well, they should have opened up their organization for more oversight from the Republic and elected officials. But instead, we see a far different scenario. We see chancellors like Finis Valorum adopt the values and beliefs of the Force. It's that same faith the public had that allowed the Jedi to take control of the Grand Army of the Republic. Now, having said all of that, I personally do like the idea of the Jedi. I like the idea of being able to blindly trust a group of people and give them the responsibility to be the moral authority in the galaxy. It's a weight lifted off of my shoulders and would definitely help me sleep better at night. The fact that they have superhuman powers is great as well. As nice as it sounds, sometimes we can't just give in to what our desires are. And that's because the truth is any leader, whether spiritual or political, has a lifespan in which they are effective rulers. It's only human nature to eventually get rid of opposing voices, surround yourself with yes men, and then to become a dictator. Even Grand Master Yoda had blind spots, and Mace Windu had begun to adopt some very troubling beliefs towards the end of the war. I think the biggest mistake that Grand Master Yoda made was believing that the Jedi were special, that they would be capable of not only being peacekeepers but also diplomats and officers in the military. Involving the Jedi in the Clone Wars was a huge mistake, one that the Jedi were not prepared for. These were monastic warriors who had no training or understanding of battlefield tactics. Their pacifist philosophy also was better suited for peacekeeping rather than fighting a war. They clearly were not ideal as commanders of the clone army, and while learning how to lead the clones, the Jedi would make countless mistakes and send millions of their men to their death without a reason. The war would permanently change how many of the Jedi viewed the galaxy. It also set a precedent for Jedi involvement in the military and gave the Jedi more and more tasks. It required the Republic to put more faith and power into the Jedi, which only stretched them even thinner. Another huge mistake was the fact that the Jedi were allowed to essentially punish and make judgment on their own members. The Jedi basically had diplomatic immunity, which was a stupid thing to give them. When the Jedi Temple bombing occurred and dozens of non-Force sensitives were killed, there was a call for justice for Ahsoka Tano's head, one of the main suspects. The Jedi knew that even though they could protect Ahsoka from the Republic's military tribunal, if they did, it would turn the public against the Jedi and make it seem like they were protecting their own. And so as a result, they kicked Ahsoka out without a fair trial. Master Yoda placed the Jedi in political and military situations that the Jedi were just not trained to handle. The Jedi were ultimately servants and should not have been worshipped as they were. It set unrealistic standards for what they could do. I've always argued that as a religious organization that literally focused on studying the Force as scholars, the Jedi would have done better in isolation, in a monastery, or on a mountain temple somewhere where they couldn't be tempted by the rest of the society to use their unnatural powers in self-serving or unethical ways. And even in that role, they could still hunt the Sith, kind of like the Demon Slayer Corps hunts demons. If you guys have the slightest interest in anime and also really like the Jedi versus Sith clash, I recommend you check out Demon Slayer. It's awesome. So I guess that's where we end off. Ironically, it was the Jedi's compassion and eagerness to serve, their moral fiber, that made them susceptible to the Republic's call for help. And at the same time as the Republic's incompetence for not developing the proper defense forces and military to protect its territory that led to its over-reliance on a group of spiritual monks. Even when intentions are pure, sometimes that's just not enough to solve a very big and complex problem.